This, as we know, is the Bob and Mary Neher Global Sustainability Lecture. This lecture series was Bob's brainchild, because he wanted something around sustainability, the earth. He grew up with the Brethren Church. He wanted to take care of the earth forever. That's why this lecture is so important. And that's why Bob and Mary Neher are so important to this university, to everybody in here, and they will be today, 2023, and they will be 100 years from now. I can tell you that. That's what legacy means. And now it's my honor to, for those of you who don't know Dean Shannon Matthews, to introduce you to Dean Matthews, who's been here for 2 years. So Dean Matthews, thank you for everything that you do. And please join me and introduce our esteemed speaker.
The speaker really reflects the interdisciplinarity that is the College of Arts and Sciences. When you think about social justice, sustainability, environmental studies, she's bringing together a lot of our areas, and so it's an encouragement to see it live and at work. Now, just to tell you a little bit about Candice Dickens-Russel, she has been spending her career working in the environmental sector in the areas, I think the poster said, about 20 years. And as a result, she's done work in urban environments, environmental justice, and environmental education. She is well known and respected for her leadership, passion, and holistic approach to solving environmental problems with combined sustainability and equity strategies. Candice has a reputation as a bridge builder and a problem solver, and enjoys leading networks, coaching, and education. Coaching and providing education for sustainable development. Just to tell you a little bit about her, she worked with the Trees People's Education Department, which she joined in 2006. She was there for 13 years and accomplished a great amount of work, so I'm just going to give you a little snippet. Working with that organization, she was the California Regional Environmental Education Coordinator for the California Department of Education, assigned to all of Los Angeles County. We know how large that is. In this role and in her capacity, Candice connected teachers to environmental education resources and built a robust network of Los Angeles of educators, in particular with an emphasis on environmental education. Now I have to say this about her, is one of the interesting things she noted in that background was connecting things outside of the classroom into what was happening in the classroom. So again, representative of things we're doing in the college to bring co-curricular things to the students so that they can apply their in-class learning. Candice work caught the attention of the California Department of Education, and she was later then appointed to be one of only 47 people to serve on the statewide blueprint for environmental literacy task force, and one of only 23 people to launch the state's environmental literacy implementation committee, now known as the California Environmental Literacy Institute. I have to also note that in thinking about her current role as CEO and serving as the president and CEO of the Friends of the LA River, she is the first person of color and the first Loess River resident to hold this position. I think that's tremendous and says a lot about her work in the field. She is also, Candice has earned, in 2019, she earned certification with diversity, equity, and inclusion from Cornell University. She also was once the director of social and environmental justice at Do-Gooder. She has done tremendous work throughout this field. And I must say, it has been a true honor to have her on campus. And I will now allow her to tell you a little bit more about her work, but we are truly privileged and honored to have you among us.
Thank you so much, Dean Matthews. That was a lovely introduction. I'm going to switch to this other mic. There we go. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really tall, so, 5'9". I'm so excited to be here with you all. I've had an amazing day talking with students, talking with faculty. It's been just a great day, so I'm excited for it to continue. I know we have a little bit of time here together. We have about 40 minutes, so I'm going to keep it on time with my timer here and just share with you a lot of the things that we're doing at Friends of the LA River, also called FOLAR. You'll hear me call it FOLAR all the time. But instead of just sharing with you just what's happening at FOLAR and the sort of work that we do, I want to weave it into what's happening with our equity initiatives at FOLAR. So instead of just like, oh, we have this program, I want to talk to you about how it's changed. And I want to talk to you about why it's changed and the ways in which we're moving in that direction. FOLAR is almost 40 years old. And we've been around for a really long time doing what I tend to call conservation as usual. Wonderful, important work, but really thinking about conservation in a more kind of narrow way. And a few years ago, we decided to change that. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what that looks like now and how we're making those changes and how that's evolving. Okay. So this, of course, is the Los Angeles River. I'm sure that many of you recognize it. We talked a lot today in our faculty moment, just a little bit about what the soft bottom looks like. That's kind of a weird way of putting it, but there are parts of the LA River that are not paved for a couple different reasons. And those parts have what we, like this riparian habitat where you've got the plant and the trees and the birds and this natural kind of ecosystem that is thriving in those areas. And so what we find is those are the areas where people want to hang out. Imagine that, more so than the areas that are completely paved. And so we'll talk a little bit about what our vision is for the river going forward, how we'd like to see more of this sort of environment and a little bit less of the paved, and how we can do that in a really safe, sustainable, smart, scientific approached way. LA River is, you can see here, there's this gentleman is fishing in the LA River. A lot of people don't know that you can fish in the LA River. I have not eaten any fish out of the LA River, but I know lots of people who have. They're still here. They're doing just fine. They're thriving. We had a presentation a few weeks ago, an event in partnership with USC, where we had some storytelling about the river at one of the local breweries. We hang out at that brewery a lot. You'll find that. You'll find that out. We love the Frogtown Brewery. And we had people come up and tell stories about the river, and there was a woman who talked about fly fishing on the LA River and the work that she does around that and bringing people to the LA River to do exactly that. So that's definitely an aspect of our work as well, or an aspect of the river that we're excited about. I don't think anybody on staff fly fishes on the LA River, but maybe. And it's just this place where people come and do things like ride their bike, this passive recreation. You can ride your bike, you can walk your dog, you can take your kid on the scooter or the stroller. These are the sorts of things we are loving to see. And of course, we never want to forget that indigenous communities, and this here are some of our partners from the Keys tribe, have always lived on, worked on, and done things on the river. So this whole idea of going to the river and doing things is not new to us. We didn't invent that. We always want to remember that. So FOLAR started back in 1986 with this guy. That's Lewis McAdams. And Lewis is our founder. And he, the story goes, cut a hole in the river. Once upon a time, it was just all fenced, right? It's like you can't go down in there. I know in Greece, everybody just kind of climbs down there and races their cars. But there are large parts of the LA River that were kind of sectioned off from people. There was no access. And you couldn't just get in the river, kind of like how you can today. And so Lewis, with being Lewis, who is a poet, a teacher, an artist, and really a very radical free thinker. We lost Lewis about 3 years ago. Cut a hole in the fence and climbed down in there with some of his friends and said, this is a good thing, and started encouraging more people to do that. And through direct action, through lobbying, through advocacy, really changed how LA thinks about its river. As my daughter says when we took her to the soft bottom part, it's a real river, and it's a real river. And Lewis wanted people to know that. And you can see here kind of it's not necessarily, this is kind of how we used to talk about our work. This is an older kind of snapshot of the way we used to talk about the work. There's not a lot of people in this statement, right? There's not as much people as you'll see in the later statement. I wanted to point that out. This is also something we're known for Friends of the LA River, is the Great LA River Cleanup. Every year we do a big cleanup. We have thousands of people come down. Last year we cleaned up, I think I've got a stat here. Yes, it's the largest urban cleanup in the nation. One of, if not the largest urban cleanup. It's been the largest cleanup for many years. Our 32nd year was last year. This year is our 33rd year. And we welcomed 2,000 volunteers and removed over 50,000 pounds of trash from the river. And so what's funny about that to me is that bringing people to the river for the cleanup, I mean, you would think it's because we want to clean the river, but we could do that every day and not get all the trash out of the river. It's not so much about cleaning the river as it is about bringing people to the river. We want people to see the river, to understand that it's a place where anyone can go. It's not my river, it's not Lewis's river, it's not Folar's river, it's not the city or the county's river, it's your river, and anyone can go there. And that's when people come to the river for the first time on a cleanup, they see other people who aren't cleaning up riding their bikes, walking their dogs, and it gives you an idea that this is a place I can hang out, especially because our cleanups happen in the 3 soft bottom areas of the river. Our cleanup is annual. It's happening this weekend and next weekend, which is why the Folar staff is on WebEx. So hi, Folar staff. They're watching this remotely because they've been running around all day prepping for the cleanup. So otherwise they would be here. So how did we bring this equity piece into it? And I tried to think about, like, how do I talk about this journey that we were on? So at the time that we started thinking about how do we do this, like, equitable community engagement, how do we think about the community at large and bring them more into the river movement, and not just, the homeowners who are in the neighborhood councils, but everyone who lives along the river. I was on the board at the time. And I remember being on the board and talking about vulnerable communities. That was the term that came up. We know them as frontline communities, communities of need. And these are communities that we really need to prioritize and target and create a different strategy for. And so I talked a little bit about how and this is something that our then CEO, my predecessor, Marissa Christensen, asked me to do, is like, can you talk a little bit about why we're talking about vulnerable communities and what that has to do, what designing for the margins has to do with the middle, because not everybody's on board with that. They're like, why can't we just do one thing for everybody? And there's a problem with that, because when you design for the margins, the middle takes care of itself. And that's something that people don't seem to understand. So when the example and the way I kind of talked about it with the board at the time was, if we have our cleanup like we've been doing for the last 30-something years, the people who come to the cleanup, who always come to the cleanup, are not going to be lost if we target particular communities and invite them particularly and especially and in person to the cleanup. And that's that designing for the margins, and the middle was okay. No one said, oh wait, you're inviting poor renters to the cleanup? I'm not coming anymore. I've been coming for 30 years, but I'm not coming anymore. No one says that, right? They might not even, these two audiences might not even know each other, right? These are communities that maybe don't even interact. But I really had to do my part as a board member to talk a little bit about why were we doing this particular thing? Why were we talking about vulnerable communities? Because not everybody was excited about that yet. And as we've grown and as we've gone down this path a little more, that's changed a lot. And we had to talk a little bit about what it looks like to be poor in LA. What it looks like to live in a place that's hotter than everywhere else. What it looks like to not have green space, to live in what we call park poor communities. And we had to have a really honest conversation about that as a board, including the G word, gentrification, including that unintended consequence of greening. What happens when you start fixing something and it changes the neighborhood and it changes who gets to live there? And how do we not take responsibility for it, but at least acknowledge it? Can we say the word? Can we say that word and be honest about the fact that that sometimes happens? And what are the strategies? There are a lot of them, by the way. What are some of the strategies that are in place to keep that from happening? And how do we intentionally weave that into the planning that we do for the organization? And that was a conversation we had to have. And it was not the easiest, but we're all there now, and I'm really excited about that. So I had to do a little bit of what's really funny, I'll say. What's funny about this work is Dean Matthews mentioned that I had worked for an organization called Do-Goodery. I was a consultant, and my job was to help environmental organizations. This is after I left Tree People. I was a Tree People for 13 years, went to consultancy for a couple of years. And it's because I got tired when I worked with street people, love it, love the organization, love it with all my heart, always will. But I got tired of going to events and having people come up to me and say, if there's time at the end, can you say a few words about justice and equity? I was like, if there's time at the end, why aren't we doing that at the beginning? Because I learned in my formal education in sustainability and social justice that you have to do those two things together. And spoiler alert, you have to do those two things together. And so I really wanted to center equity in the work that I was doing. I was doing that at the statewide level. I was doing a lot of work around equity, writing the blueprint for environmental literacy for the state, working on the implementation team. So I wanted to do more of that. So I started consulting, and I would work with environmental organizations who wanted to build equity strategic plans. And that's a very niche thing to do. It's kind of a weird thing to do. But I loved it because I've always worked with environmental nonprofits, but they're not always thinking about the larger environmental community. It's a lot of conservation as usual. And so one of my pro bono clients was FOLAR, because I was on the board. And it just so happened that I spent a year and some change, I think maybe 14 months, working with FOLAR to build a strategic plan around equity as a board member. And now all of a sudden, it's like, here's that plan you wrote, let's get started. And that's what's happening. So I did a little bit of this with the team, this kind of equity 101, and like, what do we mean when we talk about this work? And what do we mean, like, how do we build a more equitable and inclusive environmental movement? So really acknowledging some of these disproportionate environmental burdens, that the people who live along the river are experiencing the environment in different ways, depending on their backgrounds, depending on their race, depending on their location, depending on their neighborhoods. They're experiencing the same environment or similar environments in different ways, and being honest about that and talking about it. Another 101 thing that we did together was like thinking about talking about environmental justice, and that means when you're done acknowledging that that exists, those disproportionate areas and those discrepancies, what do you do about it? In what ways do you address people differently in order to make that make sense? And how do we kind of do something about that? What are some of the strategies around that? This collaborative attitude and partnership, not a situation where you show up at a community meeting and say, okay, we're here to tell you what we're going to do for your community and how we're going to improve it and make it better. It's a collaborative, it's a partnership, it's listening, it's a whole lot of listening. We did several workshops on equitable community engagement. And the authentic engagement, I described earlier when we were all talking with the students, it's not, this door is open and if you want to, you can walk through it. It takes another step. It's that, please come to this meeting, or where are you? Where is the community gathering? How can I go there and be a part of that, to weave myself into what's already happening and become a part of that landscape instead of deciding that I'm in charge of that landscape, right? Investing in workforce development. When you talk to communities, frontline communities, they ask, is this gonna bring jobs to the community? That's one of the questions you get. It's one of the questions that people want to know. What does this have to do with jobs? How is this gonna help my kid get into college? You have to invest in workforce development, and I'll talk a little bit about how we did that. So the first thing we did is we had to expand our target audiences. And so we had to think about who is it that we're trying to reach that's maybe a little different than who we tried to reach before. And some of them are not that different, and some of them are things Lewis would absolutely love, right? Like artists, for example. Other organizations that work with river communities. We are not the people who are going to solve the problem of people experiencing homelessness on the river. That's not something I'm going to be able to do. But I can partner with St. Joseph's or with the mayor's office or some other organization that's already doing that and think about how to best address those problems that are happening. Of course, our neighborhood councils, Title I schools and their parents, we actually use a different way of distinguishing schools now. The California Department of Education has something called LCAP, it's Local Control Accountability Planning, and it identifies schools of high need. So that's the tool we use in order to reach different students and to target which students we're working with, to intentionally go out and look for the communities that we want to bring into the programming and invite to come in. Of course, vulnerable communities, there's those words again that our board had to get comfortable with, whose health and well-being are really kind of dependent upon the river. And of course, our Indigenous partners. So these are some of the audiences that we kind of expanded. Instead of, well, whoever comes, now it's, how are we targeting these groups? How are we reaching out really intentionally to these groups? So We talked a little bit about Indigenous communities. We are really intentional about partnerships with organizations like Sacred Places Institute to really think about and listen to hear what sorts of things they're interested in and want to see happen around the river, what sorts of special occasions and holidays and rituals and traditions, and how can we support that, and how can we partner with their audiences when they are at the river. So that was something that was really important to us. And artists is the other audience that I mentioned. So Lewis being an artist, we've brought back our art contest, our art competition for young people, and we're expanding it into older, we're actually expanding it both ways, a little bit older, a little bit younger, so that more people can participate, and so that when we have events, we can display art about the river and around the river. The LA River has always been about art. People have used it as a canvas for forever and ever, and so there's some wonderful work happening around art on the LA River, and we wanted to be a part of that. So we also really focused on our education work, and like I mentioned, focusing on LCAP schools. And so we formed a partnership with LA Unified to bring schools of high need to the river. And we always say we're going to bring the river to the people and the people to the river. That's what we do. That's exactly what we do. So we bring students to the river. You can see the students in the bottom box are doing water sampling for, I think they're doing water sampling, yeah, for macroinvertebrates. So they're going into the water, pulling up a sample and going back and looking through the magnifiers for macroinvertebrates, which is an indicator of river health. And students, we asked them before, this is like, NGSS, Next Generation Science Standards, what do you think you're going to see in the river? And what do you think is the water quality? What do you think is going to happen? And then what do they actually see when they're done? And so the students are almost always surprised to learn there are lots of macroinvertebrates that are indicators of a clean river. So that's an interesting thing that we do. The students in the middle are building a STEM water filtration system and looking at the water quality before and after. That's an activity that we do on the river. And then because we say we bring people to the river and the river to the people, when students can't come to the river for whatever reason, we take our River Rover, which is a 38-foot RV, it's a mobile museum, to schools and to community events. And people come and check out the rover. We've had the rover since, about 2013, I think it was. So it's a little long in the tooth, but we love it. And we take it out, and people that's one of the things people recognize us for is our River Rover, which we love. And so for us, focusing on the education piece and focusing very clearly on which schools we wanted to work with, which populations we wanted to work with, was part of that expansion of our equity work. And we've always worked with students and teachers, but this was an opportunity to do a little more intentionality in that work. There's another picture of the rover, so you can see it is big. And you go in one door and you go through and you see all the displays. There's a lot of hands-on things to do in there. You come out the other door, and we love to take the rover to events. If you come to either of our Earth Day events, either this weekend or next weekend, you'll see the rover at a couple of them, and you'll see lots of children going through the rover. There's a really great story that I always like to tell about the rover. Again, once again, before I even started working with FOLAR, I think this was even before I was on the board, I was doing a partnership with the then education person at FOLAR, where we were doing some NGSS work with the local school districts. And we had the rover come out to a Paramount Unified School District school. And the students all went through the rover. They had an experience. It was lovely. Just the usual kind of thing. And then a few days later, I think that weekend or the following weekend, the rover was at a community event. And there was a little girl there that was not on the payroll, as far as I knew, giving rover tour. She was like, come this way. Take a look here, this is what's happening. And then when we kind of figured out what happened, she was one of the students at Paramount Unified. And she had learned these things and was really excited and anxious to share with her family, with anybody, frankly, who would listen. And that's the sort of thing that we want, is for students to have that feeling of like, this is our river, this is something I know about, this is something I'm familiar. The majority of my background is in environmental education, and so when I'm talking to people about how to make environmental education more inclusive, it's not, welcome to this thing that belongs to us and you're very lucky to be here. It's, this belongs to you. You can come here anytime you want. And what do you already know, right? That accessing prior knowledge. Teachers know how to do that, right? What do you already know about the river? And so in this situation, she already knew a whole lot, and she was very excited to share it. And so we like to think about that inclusive education when it comes to the river, and comes to the rover so that students have this connection, this built-in connection to the river. And I tell my, my staff all the time, something I say constantly, the students we work with today are voting in the next election. And they might not remember all the things we said about the river, but they'll remember how they felt when they were there, and they'll remember you as educators, they'll remember the experience that they had, and hopefully that moment, like all your students can already vote, but our students can't, they're high school students, a lot of them. That moment, the time they spend with us on the river, will hopefully be a contributing factor when they're looking at that on the ballot, when they're looking at initiatives about water capture, when they're looking at initiatives about stormwater capture. That's something I really feel passionate about, is helping students have that connection. That's environmental literacy. So we also do community programs, of course. We have, this was 2022, over 1,500 community members, 18 events, and people are bringing their friends. They're showing up and bringing their friends. Those are two of our amazing educators, Kevin and Danette. We love them, and they do everything, these poor kids. They do everything, they do so much. And we also have community events like this, our favorite event that everybody loves, the Bats and Brews. Remember that brewery I mentioned? We go down to the river in the summer, spring, summer, early fall, when it's, the weather's just right. And we literally just look for bats, and we talk about bats. It's a partnership with the Natural History Museum. Their educators come out, their staff, they bring live bats, they bring bat specimens, I guess, the ones that are pinned to the thing like that. They bring those, and we have some video, and we all go down to the river as the sun is setting, and we look for bats, and we do it together. We split up in a couple of groups, and it is so much fun. It is just the best night. Then we go to the brewery, and we have a presentation from the Natural History Museum. I hope you will all come to the next Bats and Brews. Check out folar.org, come out. We'd love to see you. Come say hi when you do. But we have wonderful partners here with Bat Rehabilitation and Frogtown Brewery. And these are the sorts of things that the community wants to come to. They may not want to come to a community meeting about what to do about the river, but while they're there, guess what we talk about? What to do about the river. People come to things like this, and this is a part of that larger initiative to bring more people to the river. I put this here so I can remember a little aside about birds. So I've talked about this a couple times today with the student group and with the faculty group, but we have had a wonderful, happy accident in that the work that we've done in the habitat restoration, in the invasive species removal, in the cleaning up of the river has resulted, and it's not just our work, it's with all of our partners as well, but it's resulted in increased nesting birds along the river. And so what's happened is that now we're not able to do as big of a cleanup or as many cleanup sites as we usually do. So it's one of these funny things where we're so happy and so proud that this has happened, and we're delighted that all of these species are coming back and really kind of doing things on the river, doing things. Laying eggs is what they're doing along the river. We're so incredibly happy about that. But there are consequences to that. We have community members calling up and going, why are there only 7 sites this year instead of 15 you had last year? That's because there are a lot of places we just can't go right now. Now, some people would say, well, why don't you do your cleanup in the fall? Well, people don't come to the cleanup in the fall as much. They want to come out for Earth Day. So what we've done is we've engaged a wildlife biologist who's coming out and going to literally caution tape off areas where there are nesting birds. So there'll be a lot less and fewer ability to really climb in the brush and get in there and grab the bigger pieces of garbage and trash and bumpers and radios, and I can name all kinds of weird, if anybody wants to know, ask me later, weird stuff we found in the river. I've got a list. All the weird stuff that we find in the river all the time. There will be a little bit less of that this year. So what have we done? We've expanded it to be more of a community event. So there'll be some education places, some education stations, some River Rover will be there. Our educators will be on hand giving nature walks. They'll be doing BioBlitz on their phones. People can go and identify species. So we've expanded the event to be more of a community event because we're not going to be doing quite as much cleaning up. And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow. And some people are not delighted to hear that. But we're really proud of the work. We're really proud of the work that's happened. And so if you come out on this Saturday or next Saturday, you might notice some people saying, hey, there's a lot of people down in the river right now. Why don't you go on the nature walk and then you can go down and clean up later? I don't know how that's going to go over, I'll be honest, but we're going to do our best. And so that's how we're going to handle that this year. The other thing we've done, this is a picture of our gala. It's a fancy $400 plate dinner that we used to have. I think that's how much it was. I've been to 2 FOLAR galas in the past. We've changed that, and instead, now we do Riverfest. Riverfest is a community event where it's free for the community, anybody can come. And we have a kind of a film festival on the river. We have environmental films, short environmental films, and it's just a big open space. There's people come in their food trucks, and the rover's there. There's, of course, beer and wine. There's a DJ. We have big raffles. You can see our staff member, Dennis Mabasa, there in the middle. The best raffle person ever, because Dennis is just the best, has such great energy. Our sign language interpreter as well. This is also an inclusive event. And we really just decided to throw a big party on the river to celebrate the river with the people who live on the river. And that, to me, is a really great indicator of how things have shifted a little bit. Now, do we make as much money throwing a free Riverfest event as we did when we had a No. But we do have people sponsoring it, and we will send out emails saying, hey, can you give $10 to FOLAR? And we're doing our best to continue to raise money in that way. But this speaks to the type of organization we want to be, and the type of work that we want to do, and how we want to engage with the community, whereas the other wasn't so much. And that's not to say we'll never do a gala again, but this is how we're pivoting in this moment. Other stuff we're doing, remember I mentioned workforce development? One of the ways that we're doing that is with a phytoremediation study. So soil remediation is required when there are pollutants in the soil, heavy metals, other toxins. The area that is being developed into park space right now is called the G2 parcel. It's like in the kind of like near the Burbank Meadows or the Narrows, the Narrows area, and it's right across the street. It's this on the East Bank, and it's a big space. It's 100 acres. One small parcel of that is being discussed for development with the City of Los Angeles, Bureau of Engineering, and the Army Corps of Engineers, I believe, is also involved. In order to really kind of do reclamation on that space, there's all kinds of ways that sort of reclamation happens, that sort of remediation happens. Sometimes it's paved over. Not really a good option for a hot, park-poor community. Sometimes it's all picked up and trucked someplace else. Sometimes not the best places, right? Sometimes in other communities of high need. What we're doing is working with UC Riverside, a doctoral student there, to go out and plant the types of plants that will remediate the soil. There are certain plants that can take the toxins out of the soil, and also mycoremediation, so mushrooms as well. And so we open it up to students in the community at the neighborhood, the school that is adjacent to this parcel, Sotomayor High School. And those students, there were 10 of them, came out and learned all about phytoremediation and learned all about how to do this work alongside the researcher at UC Riverside. The students all became this really cool HAZWOPER certified. They all receive a stipend at the end of the summer, and we really love this program. It was very popular. I attended the culminating event, and the students were so incredibly passionate and so articulate, some of them majoring in these sorts of things going off to college, those that were seniors. I just was blown away. And so we've opened it up to 30 students for this school year, and we had over 80 applicants. So this is what we're trying to do in the community, is when we're talking about how is this serving the community, what does this have to do with jobs, how is it going to help my student in school, this is one of the things that we're doing, and this is something we're really proud of. Our Director of Education, Medea Valencia, runs this program, does a beautiful job with it, and we're having a really great time this year inviting guest speakers from the community to come and talk about various environmental careers and things that you can do and how you can get involved. So this is the sort of work that is directly tied to our mission, directly tied to the work that's happening on the river, and engages the young people in the community. And it's funny to go to the presentation and to hear students say, I live right there, and I didn't know this was polluted soil, that this was an area that was like roped off because it's hazardous and people aren't supposed to be here. And I live right there. You see my house from here. Those sorts of realizations, those sorts of epiphanies are the sort of thing we're hoping to do, and that's the environmental justice element that's coming into the work that we're doing. So it's like all this really good, like as you go back, I don't know how to go back on this. How do I go back on this here? I think I've got a keyboard here. As you go back, you see this is stuff we've kind of always done, but in a different way, right? Engaging students in workforce development and career discussions. Yeah, we've always done that, but this is a little bit different. It's a little bit of a tweak. having a big community event or inviting the community to see what FOLAR is doing, well, it's a little bit less exclusive now. It's a little bit less like financially wonderful for us, but this is how we're doing it. This is the switch that we're making. Birds, and looking at how birds are coming into the community, and changing the event to be more inclusive of a larger community, and things that students can do, things that children can do, people who need ADA accommodations can do. That's happening. Bringing people to the river for all kinds of reasons is happening. Community programs, getting out there and talking to people, that going to people instead of hoping they'll come to you to give you their opinion. Targeting education institutions and schools and partnerships. This is all that sort of like the stuff we've always done. We've always educated students. We've always cleaned the river. We've always done community events, but it's just a little bit different. And that's really what I wanted to share, is like how we're moving things in a slightly different direction. Just a little more information about the phyto and microremediation. So it's been a really interesting and successful partnership. As the city begins to think about how they will build park space in the G2 parcel, we're hoping that it's a multi-year iterative process. Nothing's going to get done right away. This is city work, and it's a huge job. There'll be parts that they're not working on, and we're hoping we can do some microremediation, phytoremediation in those areas, because there are several years until those areas are going to be targeted for development. So the other thing we're doing that we didn't do before is we're talking about climate change and the river. And that's really important, I think, a different kind of approach. LA River is listed as one of the most endangered rivers in the country by American Rivers as of last year. And people don't really understand the connection between rivers and climate change, or what the LA River has to do with climate change. And so that's something we're trying to help people to understand, because you have flooding, right? Climate change is expected to increase the frequency of flooding on the river. We have water supply, right? We don't have enough water in LA. Now we have hotter days, more triple-digit days. That's even less water coming to us. Heat island effect, the more paved, flat, hot surface we have more of a heat island effect as opposed to the green spaces that we talked about today. And then ecosystems and biodiversity have an impact because the ecosystems change when the temperature changes. We lose species. We don't have as many of one thing or another coming to the area. So those are some ways that climate change is tied to the river. And so I think for me, my vision is that the river is such an important tool. I think I actually say that here. Oh, there's some great things. Let me see if I talk about that. Yeah, a thriving, healthy LA River is a critical tool in climate change mitigation. This is a kind of a imaginative drawing by a gentleman named Gerdo Aquina from USC, and you can see the river here on the side. I think you can see my arrow, yeah. And then what if we had this kind of park space where the river could kind of flood over and go up? And this is similar to some of the designs that we're seeing coming out of the city right now. And I like to think about what would it look like if, how when it's really hot outside, we get those triple-digit days. You see on the news, like, if you live in this community, you could go to this high school and hang out indoors in the air conditioning. Like, yay. What if we went to the river instead? What if we could go someplace where it was cooler? When you go to the river on the soft bottom parts, you notice right away the temperature changes. People always go, ooh, it's cooler here. Yeah, it is. What if more of the river was like that, and people could go to the river as a gathering place, the place for the community to meet, a place for the community to rest and relax and hide a little bit from those triple-digit days? It's kind of a vision that we have for the river, and a vision that I like to talk about a lot. But there's some other, I don't want to skip over this slide. This is a really great kind of looking at the different ways that river health ties so closely to human health. And in just this whole way that if you have a healthy, thriving river with plants and biodiversity and shade, you have carbon sequestration. You have cleaner air and lower temperatures. You have people getting out and doing things and having that passive recreation. You have that biodiversity. We're seeing bird species coming back, making a comeback in the places we've been working. You can manage stormwater and river flows. You can, of course, increase property values, which we can talk about the G word, the gentrification, of what that looks like and what that means. And you can, of course, reduce stress. Community well-being and health is important when it comes to being outside, being on the river. So we then went through that process I mentioned about building an equity strategic plan. And this is the equity statement that the LA that the FOLAR team wrote at the time, which I still think is really great. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at that. And this gave us something to focus on. It gave us a place to kind of point our efforts when it came to what do we stand for and what's important to us when it comes to equity and inclusion along the river. And then we wrote a new strategic plan. And that strategic plan, when I first came to FOLAR as CEO last year, I never printed it. I'm completely paperless. I never print anything. But I sent it to the librarian. My husband works, so can you print this for me? And the strategic plan came back, and it was 64 pages, and 30 of them was our equity work. And that's interwoven into our strategic plan. I was so incredibly proud to see that, having worked on it and not having seen it for like 6 months, and then seeing it all incorporated like that. It was really a wonderful, kind of a wonderful surprise. We identified our values and what we were looking for, what we hoped to do at FOLAR. That was a really important piece. What do we care about? It's the same things we've always cared about, but a little more intentional, a little more clear. We care about just this stewardship and having people feel that sense of ownership and responsibility. We care about that inclusivity and making sure that nobody gets left out, asking that question intentionally. Who's not here? Who's not at the table? Who's not being included? And why? And what can we do about it? Lewis would like to see this, I'm sure, creativity and open-mindedness and just playfulness. I met with each of our board members as I was coming in, and one of them said, don't get too serious. Don't take things too seriously. Stay weird. Just stay weird. And we have every intention of staying weird. Authenticity, we really care about, like, are we doing what we say we're doing? And are we doing it in the way we say we're doing it? Because people are watching what we do. And that, what is the definition of guilt? Is when your values don't match your actions. We really want to be careful about that, make sure that our values match our actions. And I think trust is one of my favorite, because when the community gets on the phone and calls me to tell me that the river is full, I don't know what they think I would do about it, but they call me to tell me the river is full, it's because they trust us. It's because they think we can do something. It's because they want to be a part of what we're doing and they know us. And that community connection is so important to us. So this mission looks really different from the one I showed you earlier. And I want to share that with you. This idea of building capacity. It's not telling people what to do, but it's about helping each person have a little bit more of an ability to advocate for nature, climate, and equity on the LA River. That's it. That's the whole mission. And then the vision is the second part of the statement. People say, what do you want to see? How do you want the river to look? What do you want to see happen? It's this. We envision this like really verdant, we tossed around the word fecund LA River. We didn't use that one. That supports vulnerable communities. See, it made it, y'all. It made that phrase made it in here after all, in climate adaptation. And the river will be transformed into a dynamic, because it's always changing. That's what my daughter was saying. We shot a documentary for KCT yesterday, and they asked her, why do you like to come to the river? And she said, because it's different every time I come. And it is. It's always changing. So a dynamic, functioning ecosystem that reduces flood risk. We care deeply about reducing flood risk. Cleaning the air, cooling temperatures, and supporting that biodiversity that's just critical to our collective well-being. The 5-year plan, strategic outcomes, is just a little bit of more of a look under the hood for our strategic plan. It's that way that we operate, the way we do business. What does it mean to us internally? Educating, activating, and the ultimate goal, which mirrors our vision, that resilient river. And I'll give you a moment to look at that. So this is a graphic that Dennis made, and I thought it was really cool that they did this, and so I just kind of colored it. But equity at the heart of everything that we do, educating, activating, and advocating. And I think that is it. So how can you get involved? People always ask me that. You can become a member. We're a membership organization. We have membership at different tiers. We're trying to grow. We used to have a great big membership, and then the pandemic, and so we're trying to grow our membership. So we'd love to have you be members of FOLAR. You have fantastic benefits, and those T-shirts people keep asking me for. You get those if you become a member. We have our cleanups that are going on that I mentioned already. Riverfest this year is in the summer. We're doing a big summertime vibe, July 23rd. You can book a group cleanup or event. You can subscribe to our newsletter at folar.org. And that is it. Thank you.